question that is deviling you and your trade is, how on earth did you all get it so wrong?
Well, I feel I have like the toughest gig tonight. So I think, first of all, it's important to make a distinction in yesterday's polls. And there was a clear difference in the polling in Scotland and the polling in England. And what's interesting is that the polls in the different parts of the country were carried out by the same companies and the same methods. In Scotland, the polls were very accurate in terms of the votes that people thought that the SNP would get, the seats that they would get, and critically also around turnout. In England, the polls were, in short, completely wrong. And I've been thinking about it a lot today, actually since about 10 p.m. last night. And I think there were three areas fundamentally where the polls were inaccurate. The first is the vote share of Labour. If you look at the other parties, the Conservatives performed a little bit better than how the polls had them in average. The polls had them on about 34.5 to 35%. The Conservatives ended on about 37.5%. So not massive differences. The big difference was with the Labour support. Labour got about 30% of the vote. No poll had them that low, and most of the polls had them on around 34%, so outside the margin of error. So that's a very, very big difference. The Greens, the Lib Dems, and UKIP more or less were in line with the polls. The second big difference was in the constituency polling for the Liberal Democrats. So nationwide, they're around 8%. That's more or less what they got. But according to the constituency polls, they were going to perform well in their strongholds. I think evidence suggests they didn't perform well in their strongholds. And the third big difference was actually turnout. So according to the polls, about 70% of people were expecting to vote yesterday. Only 66% did, which is a 1-point increase. So that's the things that they got wrong. If you add all of those things together, you get the big differences. Now, the second thing I was thinking about today is, why did they get that wrong? Now, obviously, there'll be technical reasons why. It might be that people in England and Wales were less truthful with pollsters, say, compared to people in Scotland. Maybe people in England and Wales are more shy than people in Scotland, or maybe there's some systematic problem with the way polls are conducted. For example, phone polling, not enough people use landlines anymore, or with internet polling, you always have some sort of self-selected sample. But that doesn't really, it might be the issue, doesn't really answer the question, because in other countries or in previous elections or in Scotland, yesterday the polls were correct. So independent of the technical sides, why is it that they underestimated the Labour support? And I think more interesting is, why was the Labour support lower? So the first thing we looked at today is, and something that we thought about before the election, is that maybe supporters who say they were going to vote for UKIP would have gone back to the Conservatives. But actually UKIP got about 13% of the vote. They came second in more than 100 constituencies. And what was interesting is that actually UKIP hurt Labour and the Tories more or less in equal measure if you look at the country as a whole. The big difference is that actually people who said they were going to vote Labour, or probably more critically for the Labour Party, people who voted Labour at the last election, voted for the Conservatives on Thursday. And if you look at the map, what's interesting, if you look at the constituencies on the outskirts of London, on the map on my left, you have, was expected to go red, lots of those constituencies. They went blue. If you look at the Midlands, you have a little belt of red that went blue. And those are all, tend to be all suburban communities, lots of middle-class families interested, for example, around issues around the economy. And when the election came to it, they trusted, this is my theory, they trusted the Conservatives more on the issues such as the economy, and they voted for the Conservatives.
So, thank you.